Daniel Appleton, a successful businessman who the media have dubbed the Hulk due to his 6'5" frame and the fact that he ran out of his house in just his underwear, with his chest being described as puffed out and panting, has offered a heartfelt apology in court for murdering his loving wife and OAP neighbour who bravely attempted to intervene in the murder plot. Fundamentally, the OAP 76-year-old Sandy Seagrave sacrificed her own life in order to do what she believed was the right thing, and that has to be commended. There are so many people who would rather just stand back and watch some crap go down from a distance because they haven't got the heart or the inclination or the balls to do anything, or for the simple fact that they do not care, but then would run to the media and give an eyewitness account for their 15 minutes of fame. Now, this case is so bizarre. Nobody knows what made murderer 38-year-old Daniel Appleton snap on that fateful day last Christmas. There were suggestions being made that he may have taken LSD, a court heard, but that has not been proven, despite the fact that there was traces of a type of N-bomb called N25I N-bomb and 4-MMC, which is methadone, which is a powerful hallucinogen similar to LSD, but so much more potent. I mean, so potent that it has actually caused death. However, during the court proceedings at Hove Crown Court, Daniel Appleton explicitly stated he did not take any form of drugs. When questioned by prosecutor Nicholas Corsellis that a synthetic form of LSD was present in his blood, and if it was realistic for the jury to consider his blood was contaminated by a blood donor, Daniel Appleton replied with, "I suppose there is a possibility." Again, this was a tragic situation, made even more tragic by that all accounts Appleton had a solid marriage. He had partnered up in a business with his friend of more than 11 years, and the business was thriving as a specialist garage. He also owned 2 homes, 4 Audis and 2 classic cars, and he was also trying for a family with his loving wife. That was all wiped out in what can only be described as a psychotic episode almost instantly, and that seems irrefutable. During the murder outside the property at Hazel Way, Crawley Down, witnesses said Daniel Appleton came outside in just his underwear, ranting that he was God. Witnesses also describe how Daniel screamed at his wife he could murder her, before dragging her almost naked body out of their home and beating her in their own driveway. Daniel Appleton was a big guy, weighing in at a colossal 17 stones. However, people who knew him says he was a mild-mannered person who was almost introverted and was a worrywart. So basically he took everything to heart, and it is understood he was someone that did stress about the smallest things. While he beat and attacked his wife, 76-year-old Sandy Seagrave was passing. Sandy was described as a person who lived by old-school principles and had no problem in putting someone in their right place. Now, Sandy was using a metal walking stick as she was recovering from a leg injury. In her old-school way of thinking, Sandy used the walking stick to go on regular walks to strengthen her damaged leg. When she saw what was going on, Sandy rushed over to the road where Daniel Appleton was and demanded that he stop beating his wife. In response, Daniel grabbed the walking stick off Sandy and hit her over the head with it. Sandy collapsed due to the sheer blow and lay motionless. An eyewitness, safe in his home, says Appleton enjoyed murdering the OAP because his gesture showed him waving the metal walking stick above his head as he stood over her lifeless body, before shouting a victory speech to the rest of his neighbours. Once 76-year-old Sandy Seagrave was down and out, he then turned the murder weapon onto his 32-year-old wife Amy, a school teacher at the village Cawthorne Junior School, and then bludgeoned her to death. Once the 2 victims were slowly dying, Daniel Appleton went back inside. Neighbours rushed outside to administer first aid, but by the time emergency services arrived, the school teacher and OAP were already pronounced dead at the scene. When the police went to find Daniel Appleton inside his own property, they found him in the family kitchen, completely naked and covered in a pool of his own blood. Now, the fact that Daniel Appleton killed the 2 blameless victims is not being disputed. What the courts were trying to ascertain was the circumstances surrounding the murder days before Christmas last year. Daniel was most definitely suffering from some form of psychotic episode. He was fully intent on killing himself also. The court heard how Daniel had jumped out of the loft, threw himself down the stairs. He also stabbed himself 5 times in the chest. He slashed both thighs, attempting to cut arteries. He cut his neck, head and calf muscle. He also cut his forearm. I mean, the damage was so bad that even the prosecution admitted this was the most determined suicide attempt they could consider. These were not actions of a man who was in the right frame of mind. Also, the usually meek and mild quiet man told police he wanted to F his wife, the woman that he had just murdered in cold blood, along with other profanities. Even with a dozen police officers and medics trying to help him, Appleton could not calm himself down. He kept ranting and raving about being God, even though this guy had just suffered some serious injuries himself. Another indication that Daniel Appleton was not all there is the fact that because paramedics could not find a vein due to the serious injuries, they were forced to drill into his shin to administer drugs directly into his bone marrow. The guy did not even flinch or let out a sound. Appleton had no criminal record, nor a history of mental illness or substance abuse. However, he did admit to taking mushrooms one time during a stag do some years back. Again, Daniel Appleton was described as a quiet, meek and sensitive individual. In the weeks leading up to the double murder, the court heard how Daniel had become withdrawn. It was also reported that he was the type of person that thought over everything, so it wasn't far-fetched to say he was constantly stressed. Right before Christmas, Daniel admitted that he was suffering from stress, but could not pinpoint the reason why. And then, on December 21st, Appleton went to London for a kind of school reunion. During that trip, friends noted that Daniel seemed more emotional than usual, telling his friends that we all should enjoy life more and not work so hard. It was after the reunion that the alarm bell started to ring. Daniel's wife, Amy, picked him up at the train station at midnight and noted that he seemed chatty, something that was not part of Daniel's usual character. Concerned about Daniel's behaviour, his parents were called. If you didn't know Daniel, it was said that his behaviour would be likened to a person being on drugs, but this was not a person who used drugs, remember. His dad contemplated whether someone spiked his drink during the reunion. His demeanour on that early December morning was categorised as hyperactive, pacing around his home, going outside and then coming back in again, clapping his hands profusely and huffing and puffing, his chest expanding and his stance getting broader and broader. The weird and abnormal spell continued the next morning when Daniel called his mother to tell her that he felt as if he was going to live forever and described himself like Jesus, and then he started to call himself God. The hour-long conversation abruptly ended when Daniel asked his wife to talk to his mother, and Amy refused, most likely because she could tell this was a psychotic episode and his behaviour was imploding again. In response, the usual quiet Daniel Appleton exploded, shouting how he could murder her. It was at this point that the line went dead. His parents called 999, fearing that something bad could happen. But by the time police arrived on the scene, 76-year-old Sandy Seagrave and his wife Amy were already bludgeoned to death with a metal walking stick by a huge, bold and puffed-up hulk of a man who had committed this appalling act in nothing more than his boxer shorts. By the time his parents arrived on the scene, emergency services were battling to save Daniel's life, again after he threw himself out of the loft, threw himself down the stairs, stabbed himself 5 times in the chest, attempted to sever his arteries in his thighs, cut his neck, cut his face and cut his forearm. Daniel denied murder under the grounds of diminished responsibility. He told the court he had suffered a catastrophic mental breakdown, which triggered a psychotic episode. Daniel told the court the following: "I just want Amy's family to know that I'm devastated by what has happened and I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Amy was very special to us all. She was loving and caring and she was just always so happy. Everyone loved Amy. I just want to say that I'm devastated for all the families that have been involved. Devastated for the loss of Mrs. Seagrave, and I can't bring myself to imagine the trauma that they have gone through, and I'm very, very sorry. I know sorry's not good enough, but I haven't got any words for all of this. It's very tragic." The jury took 2 days to reach an unanimous guilty verdict on both murders. So, businessman Daniel Appleton, a person who seemed to live an idyllic life and seemed to have it all, will be sentenced for murder sometime this year. In the meantime, he has a lot of time to ponder what the hell happened right from the comforts of his 12 by 8 foot prison cell. Again, this is a tragic series of events. Condolences to the 2 victims' families. Safe.